And today I want to talk to you about slowing down. When it comes to ear training, we all want to develop that really great ear really quickly. But the best way to do it is to just slow down. And you also want to be very consistent with whatever program you decide to go with. Take your time with that program. Don't do a million different things trying to develop your ear as quickly as possible. Because really, most ear training programs can work. They all develop the ear in kind of their own way. Some are going to be a little bit more specific. Like some will train a particular aspect of ear training, but that's still beneficial. And you can go as far as you can with that program until you realize that you've hit a plateau. But how do you know you've hit a plateau? You've been chipping away at this program and you're not seeing some subtle change in your ear each week. If you've been doing something for a week and there's absolutely no change at all in the way that you perceive music, in the way that you're hearing people communicate, in just the sounds that you're being able to unlock within a larger texture, then it might be time to try a different ear training approach. So you really want to develop this ability to just not worry about how fast you're progressing. You just come in each day, you do anywhere from even 5 minutes of ear training to 45 minutes at the most, and you just try and make it a part of your day. You try and make it so that, hey, I'm going to set aside a little bit of time for myself every day where I'm going to focus on developing my ear. And if you do that, you're going to see much better results than a situation where you try and study for 12 hours one day and then you don't study for a week. I mean, that's often what happens. We want to try and avoid burnout. We want to try and avoid having too many set expectations for what you're going to achieve through ear training. I mean, don't go into an ear training program thinking, I'm going to learn this in a week. I'm going to have a perfect ear in a month. And if you come across any type of ear training program that promises that promises that you're going to be hearing entire symphonies in your head in 1 week or 2 weeks, or something that you know is unrealistic, just take a moment to really evaluate that course and whether or not it's going to work. So, some things that you should be focusing on with ear training, especially if you have stubborn ears, if you have older ears, as we get a little bit older, it's not that we learn less efficiently, we learn differently. When we're younger, we can kind of be thrown into a situation, and fluid intelligence just allows us to pick up on things quickly and learn it. When we're older, we need a more methodical approach, a more study-based approach, but we can learn things. And I think in some ways, I was young at one point. What I learned when I was younger wasn't as deep as what I've learned as an older person, because you can dive deeper into something. You have more patience. You know more of what it is you're looking for. So if you can set your boundaries and kind of clarify your goals for what you want to accomplish, then I think ear training can be much more effective for you. So let's think about something that I'm just going to call micro listening. When I was at the University of Arizona, I studied with Daniel Asian. He would always talk about going from the macro to the micro. Get the big picture and then get the details. I kind of go the other way with ear training, because in a lot of ways I feel like we have to first open up the ear to be able to hear inside music. So I actually advocate for going from micro and breaking it out to the macro. So you're listening for those tiny details. If I were to play a single note on the piano, you would not just be listening for that note. If I play this note here, everybody can hear that. We can probably replicate it pretty easily. But what is it about that note? What's unique about that note? And I had somebody actually ask me recently, they sent me a very long, well-researched email, and they were asking if my approach was based on perfect pitch training. Because there's this idea where if you play a single note, somebody with perfect pitch, to simplify this, to make this really simple, because it's much more complicated than this for them, but you can essentially say that's a type of tone color. It almost has its own timbre. Now, we can't really say timbre, Timbre, because every note I play on the piano is of the same timbre that is piano. But if you want to think of it as each tone has kind of its own unique sound, that's one of the things that people with perfect pitch are able to identify. And so when I tell people that you can hear the sound of a perfect fifth, I think sometimes there's a little bit of confusion that I'm using some form of perfect pitch to do that, and I'm not. What I'm trying to illustrate here is if I play a single tone here, there's a character to it, one that's very subtle. The more you listen for it, the more it goes away. Now, if I had perfect pitch, I wouldn't need to listen for those subtle cues. They'd be very obvious to me. I would just know what that note was. But as somebody without perfect pitch, if I play this note, I can hear how it has a certain weight. The way I'm describing it is on the left side, like the left side of the tone. There's a little bit of a weight to it. And then it's a little bit clear in the middle, and it has a thin edge on top. And that's kind of how I hear it. Now, if you were to randomly choose this note or any other note on the piano and say, did I just play a C? You're playing this for me and you're trying to play a C for me to identify and to kind of test my ear, I wouldn't get it right most likely. There may be a few moments where I'm just absolutely know that it's a C. Like one time a fire alarm went off in my apartment and I knew very clearly that was a G. Those instances can happen, and those are maybe like glimpses into a type of perfect pitch. But in general, it's not that I know C sounds a certain way and then I can memorize what it sounds like. You can't memorize tones. You can't memorize their characteristics and be able to apply those every time you hear a note. But I have come to know C, and in relation to other pitches, it has that description. So let me try and tell you what I mean. If I play a C here, and then I play an E flat, in relation to the E flat sounds a little bit brighter, it sounds a little fuller, it sounds like it has more energy. So in comparison, the E flat and the C, they sound very different. And the C has one characteristic that I have memorized, but I only know it in relation to E flat. So if you were to go and play an F sharp and then a D, I might have more of a chance of identifying an F sharp versus a D, but I don't have perfect pitch. And when I am having you identify intervals, and I'm sitting there and I'm saying, just listen to the quality of the sound. What is the quality of the sound? It's open. It's stable. What about a tritone? Let's do something different. That has a quality too. It has this sort of energy. And if I had perfect pitch, then I would identify this as a C and an F sharp. I wouldn't necessarily identify them relative to each other, and I wouldn't necessarily be able to hear them as being a certain dissonant quality. I would just hear C and F sharp. The person that sent this email gave a very good description of somebody, and I've heard this before, that has perfect pitch. The person described it as, if you tell me that these four tones equal, or four quarters equal $1, I understand that, but it's just four quarters to me. They don't see it as a dollar bill. They see it as four quarters. It's always isolated. It's always separated from the whole. And so I just think this is actually a difference in really high perfect pitch training and really high relative pitch training. And if you have perfect pitch, I think you can develop this relative pitch sense. So with relative pitch, what's happening is I'm not hearing C and G. Because if that was the case and I was identifying the timbre of C combined with G and then saying that was a perfect fifth, then if I switched to B and F sharp, that timbre would change for me, but it doesn't. This still maintains the quality of a stable perfect fifth, C sharp and G sharp. It's completely different for somebody with perfect pitch, but for me it's still just a perfect fifth. I just hear it as a perfect fifth. It doesn't change when I move to different parts of the keyboard. But with somebody with perfect pitch, it changes. It's a different type of perfect fifth. For me, they're all the same. And it's kind of interesting because a lot of people with perfect pitch, if I play a C here or a C here, those are just C. If I play a C and an E, it's something that a lot of people with perfect pitch have trouble with, that I've discovered when teaching. If we have relative pitch, we'll hear the C and we'll hear the E. And that will be a major third to us. But a person with perfect pitch doesn't hear it that way. They just hear C and E. So it could be this. There's an E, and there's a C. Now it's a minor 6. And I used to have students, at first it would confuse me in my first 2 years, and I had to ask some follow-up questions to figure out what was going on. But I had a student say, well, how do you know if it's a major third or a minor third? And that actually really threw me at first because I have relative pitch. This student had sort of undiagnosed perfect pitch. And I said, well, what do you mean? And the student said, well, I can hear the 2 notes very clearly. I know what they are, but how do you know when one is higher than the other? And what I discovered later with this particular student was they actually had perfect pitch. They just didn't really know it and it never got developed to the point where they could identify labels with the sounds they were hearing. So they couldn't necessarily hear the space. So relative pitch is about space. Perfect pitch is about being very specific, like labeling exact pitches. And this is why if you had to choose one, perfect pitch or relative pitch, perfect pitch sounds like it would be the ideal thing to have, and I don't have it, so I don't really know. But it seems to me, in my experience, that when you have perfect pitch, it actually takes you out of the music a little bit. You lose that relationship that we have, that most people have, which is this sense of how tones are related, create melody. It's like they say, I read this a long time ago, and I don't know if it's true, and I don't know where the research is anymore, but I once heard that cats and animals, they hear sound, but they don't hear it the way we do. They're disconnected sounds. It's almost like perfect pitch. The tones are disconnected from each other in some sense. And I'm sure that as you develop as a musician, this changes. But if you had to pick one, I would rather be able to say, if I'm going to sing happy birthday to you, and then change pitch, happy birthday to you, and then just be able to move to any key on the piano and instantly modulate. With perfect pitch, I almost always have to think about the actual pitches they're singing. So this micro listening is not perfect pitch training. It does develop that, the way that I teach it, in some small percentage of the population, but I think that's more about students that are already kind of on the verge. They just need to be shown what the labels are for the notes and be given a little bit more time to gain familiarity with pitches. But what we're doing here is we're trying to listen for these tiny nuances, these timbral shifts, almost like the frequency of each note. And we're trying to get deep into that because when we train our ear to listen to the more sensitive aspects of pitch, not just that's a tone in the air, but there's a vibration to it, there's a color to it. And then when I go to another note, something subtly shifts. It's not just that it got higher, there's something subtly different about that. And then I go to another note, there's something different about that. This one's brighter than the previous one. So there are all these little things you can listen for that when we start to do that, and then we start to do 2 notes at a time, you listen to the bottom note and the top note in relation to each other within the interval, then all of a sudden this becomes something that ends up being much more powerful, and we can start to hear the differences in tones. So with ear training, what we really want to try and do is not worry about a lot of this academic stuff. Like we don't need to worry about whether or not it's perfect pitch training or relative pitch training. If you want to teach it, that's a whole different thing. You know, when you want to teach it, you need to go deeper, you need to understand what you're doing. But if you just want to learn, all you have to do is sit down every day and listen. And you have to listen in a way that you don't normally listen. Because if we just listen to music in the way that we normally listen, everybody would have perfect and relative pitch if it was that easy to develop. And it's not hard to develop. But what I get a lot are people become very frustrated. They become frustrated with their ear training. But what you have to keep in mind is there a challenge, just a slight challenge, or maybe a big challenge in the ear training that you're doing? If there is, but you're seeing small progress every day, I can tell you that it's not a straight line. You know, you don't just consistently get better. It's more like this, you know, and then it kind of starts to compound. And it can take a long time to build that foundation, but once you build the foundation, the ear develops very quickly. And so some of the things that are not going to work. just going to an ear training app and drilling yourself on intervals over and over again. That's not going to work, because you're going to hear them in the same way over and over again through an app with the same exact sounds. The overtones are stripped. I was talking to Virko Bali the other day, and he was actually talking about how ear training on the organ is difficult, but ear training on the piano is a little bit easier. And the reason for that is because the organ, so many overtones involved in there. The piano, not as many. So the piano is in some sense more clear. But if you go and use an ear training app where the sounds have been highly processed, or they're MIDI sounds, or they're kind of like soft synths is what we used to call them. They were like software synthesized sounds. So it's a tone that's been manipulated to kind of sound like a piano, but it's not a real piano. All those things strip the overtones too much. Even a good digital piano will have some semblance of overtones. But when you only practice in a very unnatural way, listening to very unnatural sounds, which is what most ear training apps will do, then it's not going to translate to real music. So what I'm suggesting you do is pick an ear training program, stick with it. As long as you're seeing a little bit of progress, don't worry about it. Don't worry about how long it takes you. You just come in each day, you do the exercises, and you go on. And if you're taking my Flawless course, the way that works, it didn't work this way in the beginning. In the beginning, it was always my goal. If you watch my very, very old intro video on Flawless, I tell you that my goal was to create a course where you just come in each day, you complete a lesson, you're done, you come back the next day, you complete another lesson. So you go from lesson 1 to 2 day by day. That was the goal. And when I first started creating the course, I would tell people to get 100%. And the reason for that was because I knew 100% was actually very difficult, but it gave me time to work on the next lesson, because I was doing this while also teaching the university. I didn't have a lot of free time. And so in order to keep your ears developing, we had to complete the same lesson over and over again. Now what I tell people is only if you get 100%, you go on to lesson 2 the next day. If you don't get 100%, you just spend 3 days on the same lesson. And then you move on, no matter how good you are currently. And what you do is you get through the end of an entire unit that way, spending no more than 3 days per lesson. Then at the end of the unit, ideally, you've been keeping track of the lessons you had trouble with. You just go and you do those one more time, partly as an assessment to see if you've improved, and then you go on to the next unit after passing the final exam. Final exams are they're checkpoints. So if you can pass a final exam for the unit, then you have learned what I wanted you to learn for that unit. Your ear is at the level to move on to unit 2 or unit 3. That's how the final exam works. There isn't a final exam for unit 2 because I actually just want you to go right on to 3. Now, what happens is this works because no matter what, if you just did one lesson a day, you will spend at least 60 days focusing on the perfect fourth and the perfect fifth in various different ways. And 2 months is enough time to get a decent level of recognition. And then what happens is we add the major and minor thirds, the major and minor sixths, and then the major and minor sevenths, tritones, and seconds. And what happens is when you spend about 2 months on each one of these pairs, while still continuing to get better at the older pairs, eventually what happens is you reach this point where you can just identify all of the intervals, because we have laid the pathway and enough comparisons have been made that only at the end of the training does your ear really get good. And we're going to be learning so many other things during the training. It's not just about intervals, it's about chords, chord progressions, being able to hear inversions of chords, which a lot of people think is impossible, and it's really easy once you learn how to do it. And we're doing all these different things to develop your ear. And the exercises constantly change. Every lesson is subtly different, and sometimes it's majorly different. And sometimes you'll have a lesson where you just say, that was impossible. But keep going, because maybe not the next lesson, but the one after that is going to take a step back. It's 2 steps forward and 1 step back. That is the approach I take. I push you, I challenge you. You work on a lesson for 3 days, maybe you only get 50%, and then I take it back a little bit, and then you can get a higher score, and then we increase the difficulty again, we go back. We're constantly straining your ear in a way and pushing you forward. And the reason it's called flawless ear training is because you can't make a mistake. If you make a mistake, you just complete the lesson again. There are no drills. It's not like you have to complete 90% to move on to the next lesson or it won't work. that kind of stuff doesn't work, and it's not really practical for how we perceive music. So I just want to encourage you to keep practicing, to keep working on your ear training, and to keep doing the things that you need to do to be able to realize that really powerful ear. And if you're confused about where to start, I generally recommend everybody starts with flawless ear training. From there, as you're learning in the flawless ear training course, you can start to find out a little bit about my other courses, and you'll start to figure out what the next step for you is. You can also just email me, ask me a question on YouTube, book a consultation with me, and I will talk with you and figure out where you're at and what the next logical thing for you would be. But I encourage you, before you reach out to me, try the flawless course, try and get through Unit 1. If you can't get through Unit 1, then maybe talk to me. Or if you're finding that Unit 1 is actually very useful, then keep going with that. Finish Unit 1 before you take any of my other courses. You can always work on audiation at the same time, but audiation is integrated into flawless as well on a lower level, but it is integrated in there. So that then when you get to the later courses, then you'll be prepped for them, like the Audiation Masterclass series. The other thing I'll say is the only exception to this, just start with flawless. That's my recommendation. But for most people, if you don't know how to read music at all, do the staff speaks. And when you're doing the staff speaks, don't worry about the ear training portion. You're not meant to get any of those right. I don't expect you could get them all right, you could get them all wrong, doesn't matter. What matters in that course is that you are learning what the notes are on the staff system, in the treble, the bass, and the C clefs. If you don't know those 3 types of clefs, and for the C clef, I'm talking about alto and tenor is what we work on, then you really do want to take this course, because that's an important part of musicianship, and it'll help you succeed, okay? So we want to keep doing this, we want to keep developing, and just keep training your ear. Don't think about it. Just press play, do the exercises, whatever program you're using, spend no more than 45 minutes, and come back the next day, and that's how you're going to get the best results. And I mean, if you just start doing this day after day, in a year, you're going to have an ear you don't recognize. There's no way you don't. If you spend 45 minutes a day, 20 to 45 minutes a day, there is no way your ear does not change in 1 year. And if it doesn't change in 1 year, get in touch with me. But you gotta tell me that I honestly spent 20 minutes a day, every day for a year. Otherwise, my answer is going to be, did you spend 20 minutes a day every day for a year? If not, well, that's why you didn't see the results. It's just about consistency. Daily work. Consistency. You got to find the time. All right. Well, I hope this was helpful for some of you. I'm going to post some more videos. We'll have a live stream on Wednesday, as usual. Wednesday is just when the live streams are. So I hope you can join me for that, and you can ask questions there as well.